how you vote. The question here is that we need to make responsible decisions to ensure that social economic justice for, and particularly the poor are looked after in this process. So this election matters. This election matters. How we make decisions leading up to the to election matters. And we know what happens the road to election. Suddenly promises are made by governments, things they never agreed to in a million years, they suddenly agreeing to. Everybody's excited about the change that is coming, quote unquote. And so we're here to make informed decisions as citizens who care about where we're at, as people who care about our society, and taking that conversation forward. So we have some really important, I was going to say some really important people, and I hope not to embarrass you, but I think some thought leaders in the space, and leaders in the political sphere, and helping us have these conversations and deciding and helping guide us in terms of sort of areas we need to be thinking about as we all walk towards 2024. And so I'm going to let Amanda do a lot of the more in-depth introductions of our guest speakers. But the idea here is that they're going to help us facilitate a conversation. But while we're having that conversation, please do feel free to note your questions down. There will be an opportunity for Q&As. And this is a safe space. I have to repeat that. It is a safe space. Feel free to articulate yourself. Feel free to articulate what you feel is important, so that it helps the rest of us. Maybe it's things we haven't thought about. And so I don't want anyone to feel, you know, that this is one of those spaces you sort of have to be quiet and sort of keep your thoughts to yourself. Please, that is not what we want to encourage this evening. As people who care about the society we're in, we welcome conversations from whatever side of the spectrum you sit on, all right? So that's enough from me, and I particularly note our guests online. We particularly welcome you, and we hope that this is not gonna be one of those things where we lose you halfway because of sound or etc. I'm sure it's properly set up. And so I'm going to call Amanda, who's going to introduce our speakers, and then we'll just get into the good stuff right away. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Amanda Ringquist. I am the Education and Training Manager at the Black Sash, and I've been here since the beginning of 2020. So a fraction of what some of you have been members of. Rachel said I was going to start with the good stuff, and to those who are coming in now, there are lots of seats in the front. The good stuff is the politics, but if anyone has ever watched elections in South Africa, you know it always starts with what they call stomach politics. So before we begin, I'm going to make a plug to say that on each and every one of your chairs is a donation card with a QR code. So if you would like to donate to the work of Black Sash, please don't be shy. It is not like buying elections. We will not be dictated by your donation, but we will be very happy. And there is also in the front some books for sale. You can use the QR code to purchase the books. We've got Mary's book here, and we're also very glad Mary's here. And we've got some other we've got Sheila Duncan's book here that's also for sale on any donation. So please, don't be shy. So that's just my advert before the elections. And now we get on to the good stuff. So I want to introduce the topic, and then I'll introduce the speakers. So the topic tonight is electoral reform in South Africa. And many of you may know that in 2020, the Constitutional Court ruled that the Electoral Act should be amended to allow individuals to stand for and be elected to the National Assembly and the provincial legislature as independent candidates. The ruling began the process of electoral reform in South Africa, which will provide citizens with the opportunity to change the electoral system through their participation in the public process and for the law to be amended. So I think the key question tonight is, what strengthens democracy? Does the introduction of independent candidates strengthen democracy? Does this electoral reform strengthen democracy? What is the state of our democracy? And those are several of the questions we will be posing to the panelists tonight. But let me introduce you to our wonderful panelists. First, we have Letlo Gonolo. She's called herself an electoral systems researcher, but she's actually an electoral research expert. She's been solely dedicating several years now to electoral reform research at My Vote Counts. Her job entails developing an organizational position on South Africa's electoral system. She holds a master's in politics and international relations from the University of Johannesburg, and she has a keen interest in human rights, democracy, and governance. So thank you, Letlo Khonolo. Then, then we have Dan, who's a friend of mine and a senior researcher at the Council of Declaration of Interest. None of his views are mine. He's a senior researcher at the Council for the Advancement of South African Constitution, popularly known as KSAC. He holds a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Pretoria. He is also a master's candidate in constitutional law at the University of Cape Town. Thank you, Dan. And then our final speaker needs no introduction, but I will give her one anyway. Most of you know her right now because she's been sued by the former president, prosecuted by the former president, but that is not her only claim to fame. She is a senior legal researcher, documentary producer, and best-selling author. She writes for News 24. She also regularly offers analysis on South Africa's most high-profile legal stories on radio stations such as 702, Kaya FM, SAFM, and Power FM, but is most passionate about reporting on social justice issues. Karen has appeared on international broadcasting stations like Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, Sky News, and her latest book is focused on the aborted Russia-SA nuclear deal called Nuclear. Most recently, as we all know, Karen successfully challenged former President Jacob Zuma's attempt to privately prosecute her, with the High Court finding that Zuma had pursued the case against her with an ulterior motive to silence her. And she is currently also an associate producer for a documentary on Oscar Pistorius. Oh. At the end of the discussion, we must tell us a little bit about that. After Oscar Pistorius, we all became legal experts. so I'm going to allow the speakers to kind of give their initial thoughts on electoral reform, and then we can I'll ask a few questions, and then we can also open it up to the audience. So Letlo Khonolo, do you mind going first? There's a mic for you there, or we can use the same mic.
Do you sort of have a particular interest, or just to sum it up, where do you guys want to start? Because I mean, it's been such a complex journey with this. But I just want to quickly start maybe with the system that we have internationally, so that we just get an understanding why the current electoral act is complex and does not really work, because obviously there are blueprints everywhere. You just can't come up with something that's not going to work. You always have to sort of see case studies elsewhere. So really, an electoral system, there's sort of like 3 core types. So what happens is that countries usually have different variations, or they just play out. Is this? Is this better? Yes, as I was saying, so there's just 3 core electoral systems. 3 core electoral systems types. So what we have, maybe just to kick us off, it's what we call the plurality system. So what happens here is that the person that we vote for does not necessarily have to get all of the votes, or get maybe 50+1. They just need to get be the first in line. So maybe the person, there's 30%, 20%, 10%. So those different candidates, maybe candidate A gets 30%, candidate B gets 20, candidate C gets 10. So what happens in this system is that candidate A that got 30% becomes the leader, simply because they are the first in line. So they don't need a majority, they don't need to reach a certain threshold. So this is sort of what the system that exists, and the UK is quite a good example of this. The government that they currently have, that's a story for another day. But the Conservatives actually went into power with only 43% of the vote of the country. And with that 43%, they were able to sort of push that Brexit. So what it took was 43% in this type of system. And then what we have, what we call the majority system. This is where the candidate that we are voting for, or that's contesting, needs to get 50+1. So they need to get a majority. They don't need to get all the votes, but they need to pass a certain line. So 50 plus 1, for instance. So if there's candidate A and candidate B, either of them have to pass 50. So if we do an election and both of them are still below 50, they would still need to pass that 50%. It's a requirement as for that system. So what happens that if, for instance, we have those two candidates and they don't go over the 50%, what happens is that there would have to be a re-election so that one of them, high water, high, they have to go above. So I think this happened also in Zimbabwe. That caused sort of a problem. There was a re-election as well in the 2008 crisis. And then we have the proportional representation, which is what we have back at home, where this is very simple. You get a share of the votes and they're translated into seats. And in South Africa uses the party list, which is political parties are the ones that compile a list of people that they want to put them into parliament, and then once they get a number of seats, maybe for instance they get 20 seats, they're going to go back to their members and say these are the 20 seats that we have, these are the people that are going to go. So the political parties are the ones that control that and not the voters. They are the ones that compile the list that they give it to the IEC, and they are the ones that are able to sort of change what happens with that list. It's a very popular system. And when you look into the history, what they say it's that it was the best system at the time because the idea was to redress, and also to redress the issues of apartheid, so to get as many people into parliament as possible, and to also get diverse people and to also get minorities in parliament. So if you look at the system, it works pretty well to achieve that, because even people with like 40,000 votes or 30,000, they do end up getting a seat. We see with Al Jamaa now, they are able to be to have a powerful voice in parliament. If they may exactly, so we have that because of that the PR system that we use. So those were sort of the idea there. But remember, and I think most people here would know that it was meant to be a transitional system. It was not meant to be something that we're going to have throughout. So it was just for us in 1994, just to get people to be able to vote. I mean, it's a simple system. It's very inclusive and very easy to understand. I mean, the others that I mentioned are quite difficult to understand the numbers, but this one is, in particular, is very easy. So the idea was to use it in 1994, and then come the next election in 1999, South Africa sort of goes to the drawing board and gets a better system. I mean, the idea was to have constituencies where people are able to nominate people in their locality. So this hasn't happened, unfortunately, since 1999. There's been efforts to try and change the system, but it doesn't happen. The first attempt was with the Van Slavet report in 2002 and 2003, and then it gave recommendation that you can change the election in this particular way. Maybe, for example, the parliament has 400 seats. Maybe the 300 can be constituency-based, which is both political parties and independent candidates, if they would be independent candidate. But they didn't mention, but they just said 300 seats would be from the constituencies, and the other 100 would be for political parties. So just to change and have that sense of direct accountability and local representation. So this has been sort of the blueprint for electoral reform that we've been having. But nothing has been done since. There's quite a few attempts as well. There was a private member's bill. There was something on Kalma Motlanthe as well. But it's always been something that has been put on the shelf that we'll do it later, But it's never happened. So the debate now starts around electoral reform, because remember, it was not meant to last as long as it did, but now the system that we have started having cracks in terms of accountability. Like I said, it's the political parties that determine who makes it to parliament through the list. So what happens is that as a voter, my power ultimately ends by the ballot box. Once I give you enough votes that you need to get into parliament, that's it. So what happens is that political parties are the bosses of those people that are supposed to be elected representatives, and they become loyal to the political parties, the politicians themselves. So the system that we have creates that disconnects between us, the voters, and the parliament, simply because of how the system is set up. It's not necessarily, okay, maybe they want to, but the system really does not have that accommodation for us. So those are the challenges of the system. So that's where sort of the idea for electoral reform began, to sort of to push that idea that was in 1994. And then the issues with the current system that we have, the lack of accountability, political parties being their own bosses, and that's when we pretty much won to an extent when we had the judgment that you spoke about, to include independent candidates. But however, it's still a big fight because the system is not clear-cut. There was a document that they could have used, which was the First Islamic report that I spoke to, but they didn't. And they didn't even speak to the 3 types of electoral systems that I spoke about. They needed to pick something from there, but particularly because our constitution even constrains us, it says that there's certain elements that the system needs to have ultimately. It needs to be inclusive, it needs to be able to foster accountability and so forth, and also result in general proportional representation. So Parliament was hamstrung in the sense that whatever system that they come up with needed to speak to those elements of the constitution, and they couldn't even pick those other, the plurality system or the majority. They had to play around the PR, but make sure that some way, somehow, it becomes accountable. The people that are elected become accountable, and there's general proportional representation. So what we saw with Parliament, they just whipped up a system. Yeah, stop it there. Sure.
Thank you so much for that very good contextualization of what we have. I think you can hear me. I think you can hear me now. Thank you so much, Letogonolo, for that contextualization and the key question of whether this does create, one of the things you said is, and then we'll get to that, is whether this does create accountability. But Dan, I'm going to hand it over to you now for some thoughts.
Thank you so much. I think Letogonolo has covered much of the ground and has kind of laid out the challenges that we had with the system prior to the judgment, I think, New Nation Movement judgment of 2020. Now, I want to provide somewhat of a counter to the idea that, meaningful electoral reform should focus on the inclusion or a move away or a move towards individuals as independent candidates being elected into office. And that is that our constitution says, as Letogonolo said, any electoral system that we adopt must result in general in proportional representation. And that was not an arbitrary choice, right, on the part of the constitutional drafters. It was a very deliberate choice. And that is because South Africans are very tribal. That is because of our history. We gravitate towards people who look like us, who talk like us, who have similar experiences to us. And so the party system, for all its flaws, ensures that there is balance between the demands of representativity, right? That a legislature or a body like the National Assembly looks like the rest of the country, right? That it isn't unrepresentative, right? And so we see this strongly, for example, in the ANC, which has a gender parity policy. Half of the MPs that go to Parliament have to be women, right? And that in its own is an advantage because if we were, for example, to adopt a system like the UK, where the local constituent candidate becomes the MP for that particular constituency, we would most likely see a very skewed demographics in terms of how these votes are distributed. And that's important in the context of our history to say, yes, one person, one vote, but there are some national imperatives that we want to avoid a system where for example, in the context of just like inequality, some a very wealthy suburb on the one hand, a very poor township or whatever, all in the same ward, and people gravitate to the candidate from the suburb, right? That candidate does not have the interest of the people on the other side of the bridge, and you get all sorts of problems. So that's the one thing that proportionality has helped us with is this diversity in representation. But again, the downside is this deficit in accountability, in that you're not accountable as an MP to anyone. There are MPs who who have constituencies in provinces where they have no history, just because they were, on the list of the NEC of the ANC. Now they have to go spend a week in Limpopo or something, and they have no roots, no connection to the people there, and so there is no way in which voters can directly interact with the people that represent them or that are supposed to represent them. And I think the other thing is that because we have we have elections every 5 years, there isn't an opportunity for voters to in the midterm assess the performance of their MPs. There's no way for voters to say, well, we don't think you're having a good job, we should get another opportunity for someone to take your place. Now that's a feature of, I think, the one good thing about American politics, is that their voters every 2 years get an opportunity to say, we're not happy with how things are going, we're going to vote you out, we're going to have someone in. And so that is one other thing that we might want to look at, to say, should there be a mechanism in the interim before the next general elections for voters to have a voice and say, the people who represent us should change, or we're not happy with their performance. Now, just to close off, thanks, Amanda, is that the one thing that I don't think we've paid enough attention to, and which we could still adopt in a proportional representation system, is the idea that political parties should put their list candidates, as it were, to the voters to choose, right? So the voters themselves choose who goes onto the list. And in that way, you could still have the benefits of proportional representation with the added benefit that these people are not being rewarded for party loyalty or anything like that, but are actually the people that the voters have chosen. So, yeah.
I don't know if I'd like that idea if I was a loyal party member. Just want to say that. But thank you for that, Dan. Karen, do you want to go for it?
Just following on from what Dan was saying, I mean, I think the idea of having an MP or a senator that you can directly appeal to in terms of your community-specific issues is something that's completely foreign to the South African public. I mean, you hear it a lot in foreign jurisdictions about, oh, I wrote to my senator, or this is the person that I need to approach on this particular issue. And we simply don't have that. And I think that's what the Electoral Amendment Act, the litigation that drove that, was about, obviously the freedom to not associate yourself with a political party, but goes to the heart of what people are desperate for in this country, and that's real accountability. The idea that you have people in Parliament who are actually there to represent you and not to further the interests of the particular political party that they're representing. And I think that that's the frustration with the current system. That being said, the Electoral Act Amendment Act, I think, is going to be is being subjected to constitutional court challenges at this point. And I think, given certain massive holes in that act, they will be successful. And I think the real question is what happens to our elections in 2024 if that happens. Because the Constitutional Court has shown considerable reluctance to interfere in elections previously. And if there is a finding that Electoral Amendment Act is unconstitutional and unlawful, I think it has massive implications for what will actually happen. And I think that's something that all of us should be concerned about. Just by way of example, if, for instance, as Daryl Glazer points out, who was part of the advisory panel that advised Aaron Motsoaledi on these Electoral Act reforms, said, if you had an excellent candidate who got 50% of the votes of the population, that person under the current legislation would only get 1 seat in parliament. And that is just, it needs to only to be spoken, to be seen for as unfair and bizarre as it is. And I mean, you're essentially, in many respects, in asking MPs to come up with the framework of this law and this legislation, asking the wolves to guard the chickens, you know, because these political parties have a vested interest in not making it easy for independents to contest, because the ANC is very well aware that it's looking at not getting a majority in the next election. And I think other political parties don't have an interest in pushing for independents to have greater power and greater representation in parliament. And that I think is one of the flaws of this process. And of course, you know, the Constitutional Court in that ruling was obviously very mindful of separation of powers and the fact that Parliament is the one that drafts legislation. But in the absence of clear guidelines as to how that happened, I think what we've seen is an act that really fails to honor the spirit by which that judgment was given. And also this, you know, as an independent candidate, you have to get something like 13 or 15 times the amount of signatures to justify you being able to, you know, to be elected potentially or stand for election than the member of a political party. I think that for them it's 1,000, and for a person, an independent, it's like 15% of the candidates in that. I mean, that's manifestly unfair, and I think the court will find so. That I know I need to wrap up. But the other issue that I think is very important, which we don't focus enough attention, is, of course, the My Vote Counts ruling, which says that as ordinary people, we're entitled to know who funds our our political parties. Now, the EFF that regularly has like huge like party political events, campaigns, very expensive posters, clearly a lot of money being thrown at it, insists that it's only getting those money from its members. And I've had engagements with the IEC where they've said, look, we don't want to be the watchdog body. We have 5 people that are looking at political funding, but we feel that this is massively problematic for us, because if we start policing political parties outside of an election, it's going to really undermine us in terms of just, you know, being able to being seen to do that election freely and fairly. We don't want this job. And I think that in situations where it's very clear that certain political parties are forming, you know, becoming proxies for foreign interests, etc., the lack of disclosure around where political party funding is coming from, even in the light of that ruling, is something that South African public should know more about and should be pushing for, because we have a right to know who is funding these political parties. And we also have a right to know that if they don't declare that kind of information, they're going to face consequences. And at this point, that simply isn't the case. The IEC does not want to do this, doesn't have the people to do this. And I think there's also question marks, even if they found funding issues, as to what they would do about it, you know, what the consequences would be. Thanks.
Thank you. I have quite a few questions for all of you, and I put a question for each person, but I imagine you're going to want to answer. Can you just switch the mic off, please? You're going to want to answer each other's questions. But I think my first question, it's going to be for Letlo Gonolo, but feel free to chip in, anyone. We're talking about accountability, and we're talking about the fact that, you know, people don't have senators that they can write to directly. The introduction of independent candidates can create more accountability. But do we, at a local government election, at the local government level, people do vote for their ward councillor directly. You can stand as a ward councillor. You don't need to be a part of association. Are we seeing the local elections to an outsider like me looks like it's what my old boss used to call a dog show. So do we see accountability at the local level where there are direct elections?
No, we don't. You know, I wish I had a different answer so that I can help with the whole issue of wanting independent candidates in the national legislature, but we don't see it. Unfortunately, we don't see it. But you know what, I think Dan touched on it to say that, you know, not necessarily that independent candidates are the panacea, you know, of everything. I think what people here wanted was some sort of direct accountability and some form of local representation. Is that off? Yeah, because with the system that we currently have, or now, because it's changed, what happened was that South Africa was one whole big constituency. So there wasn't really any demarcation. So what people are really crying for is that local representation, to be able to go knock on someone's door when something happens. You made an example of the UK system where the MP that goes to Parliament in Cape Town is somewhere from Mpumalanga or in that locality. So I don't think it's fair to say that independent candidates will be able to solve everything, because we see the example in local government. But I think the local government system also has issues on its own, and I think it needs clarity, because what needs to happen is that it's a mixed system, right? So you are able to nominate councillors either through PR, or what we have, it's the ward, which is the candidate. So what happens is that political parties come and influence the wards, or come and say this is the or come and have posters of the ward councillor from that particular party, but you don't even know that person. It's someone from somewhere else. So that's how the system is being undermined. So maybe if there was clarity within that system, where there's no influence of political parties, where the ward councillor and the PR councillor are from the ward as per the legislation at local government, maybe we would see a difference in terms of independents being more accountable, because they would have a mandate from that particular person. But I think the system is not well executed and very susceptible to party politics, so it's not functioning well. So we don't have a good model of independent candidates actually doing well than political parties.
Does anybody want to add to that? No. I think that is the concern, that we don't have a wall of. And also, I don't know if we have, I mean, this is just a thought, but enough political education on knowing that there are these routes, these doors that you can knock on. But Karen touched on this, and I wanna kind of get into it a bit. Do smaller parties and independent candidates not just benefit bigger parties? And we've seen this with coalition governments, right? So you've got someone who, I think, let's give the big example of the City of Cape Town mayor many years ago. Helen Zille was the mayor for years, and the DA had a very small political party, but like a 50-party coalition running in the city. It wasn't 50 party, but it was, I think, you know, when she was mayor, she had, and we see that in Tshwane, we see that in Joburg, where, well, not necessarily in Joburg right now, but in the past, where parties like the DA and the ANC have managed to coalesce and get people to support him. So the question is for Karen, but I see Dan is holding the mic. But yeah, so do you think that that smaller parties and independents will just serve the ANC and the DA? The money, that position speak?
One of the things that's being very interesting at the moment is this whole discussion within the ANC about coalitions, and whether or not they'll form a coalition with the EFF, for example, because you're dealing with a highly factionalized party where there's a certain, perceived RET-aligned element of that party that's very happy to coalesce around the EFF, but a more sort of, Ramaphosa-aligned aspect of the party that doesn't want to do it. And you see then Fikile and Balula coming out and saying, well, we've got certain guidelines, et cetera, et cetera. So, I often feel that there's such a huge gap between the people that are supposed to be leading us and actual normal human beings. And there's because it's like there's no sense from them of we have a clear mandate from the population to do what we are doing. Those coalition discussions are happening independent of voters. We are not part of them. We're not asked, do you want us to, align with whatever political party that may have views that are totally antithetical to what you voted for. And again, it's this issue of people being in politics for power and not for other people. And I think that that's at the heart of the frustration of ordinary people. And I think that, whether it's electoral reform in terms of independent candidates, et cetera, there's just this hunger that we want something different. This is not working for us. People are being let down. I think your point as well about people being from the areas where they're deployed from. It's one thing to sit in a community that's been without water for 6 weeks and to be going and hammering on and saying, my people where I live are suffering, or to be sitting in a parliamentary village where you have constant supply of services. There's a disjunct there, whether you admit it or not. And I think that's the problem that there's a lot of frustration around that, and it has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed soon. The other point to make is that our voter turnouts are extremely low. And one of the most distressing figures that we have is that less than 1 in 5 of young people, we're talking 18 to 24, will go and vote. So we have a majority young population, and we have the highest youth unemployment rate in the world, which is 60%. And that group, that lost generation, is choosing not to vote. And that is something that we have to be concerned about, because clearly they feel, and this is a global phenomenon, but it's very bad in South Africa, that they're not being represented by this group of old men who are currently standing for government. So I also think that that's a potentially important issue.
Thank you. Those are very important words. I think there's a chasm between what's happening on the ground, what people want, and what's happening with politicians. So my question to Dan, who so boldly suggested that the public vote for parties lists, is the solution to, if there's clearly an accountability issue between people and Parliament, is the solution, it seems to be the solution is to kind of ensure democracy within a party. So you're suggesting monitoring people's lists. We've spoken about My Vote Counts campaign for monitoring funding. So now what we're doing is, because democracy doesn't exist on the ground, we're creating democracy at Lutuli House. And I don't know if that's our role, our position, and if what do you have? Is that going to bring us more accountability to monitor parties more?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't know, I don't have the answers, but there's something that Karen said earlier about independent candidates that I think is being overlooked. Is an independent candidate is one person. That person is going to get enough votes to get them 1 seat. The rest of the votes are going to be distributed to a political party, whether you like it or not. That's just the fact of the matter. You're one person, you get enough votes for 2 seats, you can't split yourself in half and occupy 2 seats, right? And you need a mechanism of distributing those votes to the rest of the parties who participated in that election, that ensures that every single vote counts, right? And so, yes, we may not like political parties, or we may not like political parties right now, but they remain the best vehicle for us to ensure greater engagement and participation in democracy. And that's why it might be an option to say, should there be more participation by the public in political party issues? Now, that I don't know how that would work at all, but what is certain is that independent candidates, for whatever virtues they may present to the system, will not make that much of a change if there actually isn't a change in the political culture of South Africa, which, as we've said already, young people don't want to vote. South Africans generally, I think there was an Afrobarometer survey, if I'm not mistaken, that said people would be willing to give up democracy, right, just for things to work. That is a very, very serious challenge. And we see this not just in South Africa, but in Latin America, in Eastern Europe. Right-wing populists are coming to power. They are dismantling democratic institutions. And it's that old saying about, I think Italy under Mussolini, that you know, for all that you could say about him, at least the trains were on time. And that is quite scary, that people are willing to give up their freedoms just so they could have a functioning society. And so I think there needs to be, electoral reform itself is only a small part of the work that needs to be done to cultivate a democratic culture that hopefully will, you know, filter into these political parties and make them more responsive to citizens.
Oh, no, I just wanted to jump on the issue about political parties and how we can make them work, and the issue about the open list. There's work that we were trying to do at my vote council called inter-party democracy. I'm trying to understand the internal politics of a political party and whether we can make them more democratic from the inside. So the idea is that once a party is democratic from the inside, they'll be able to sort of ooze those democratic principles. So maybe just look through political parties in terms of their structures, mandate, what principles do they subscribe to? Are they democratic in how they set up structures, the SGs of the world, the TGs? How do they get there? How's the gender issues? How's that all of that set up? So I think the idea is to understand democracy from within. So just thinking about it, to what extent can that influence how they behave once they in government? So it's something, it's research that's ongoing, but yeah, just wanted to say that it's something like that. We're looking into the internal politics of political parties.
I know you are, and I attended an MVC webinar in which I can't remember her surname, BT, the head of. Yes, Billy Hoffmeyer. Yes, I know she's Billy Hoffmeyer's sister. I think. But anyway, she's the head of elections or something at the ANC, and she said. The ANC, obviously, the ANC is the only party that has a gender parity policy. 50% must be women. And she said if they didn't have that, all of the electoral lists would be just men. But then I thought, it's great to have that gender parity policy, but then it had been the same week in which the ANC MPs had fought with EFF MPs in which they used the allegations of sexual harassment as sort of cannon fodder to get to each other. So there's no point in having such great gender parity politics in. You asked, what happens when they get to parliament? Internally we've democratized them, but when they get to parliament, women's bodies are used as electioning tactic. But I want to open up to the audience because Khuluma does mean speak in isiZulu, so we want to have a conversation. I note one hand here. Tando is going to come help you with this. Or is someone? Thank you. Okay, so one hand over here and one hand over there. And is there another hand? Tando, we'll start here, right? One more hand, and we'll do a round of 3. Don't be shy. Okay, we'll just do the 2 questions for now. Go for it. Please introduce yourself.
Okay, evening everybody. I'm Aisha Davids, Lavender Hill, Women Out for the Nation. This discussion is very interesting. I've just got one question, and when I ask this question, I ask it from a ground level. Because we work with the people on the ground level, and our constituency is like, when it comes to the elections, we mainly focus on the local councillor. And for me, it's quite a concern when we see the Constitution of South Africa and how they act. It's actually a different picture for us out there. because our main concern is that once they elected or once they are there in the post, no community person or local person can tell them anything or ask them anything, because it's like they are the people that is saying, and they are the people that decide. So my constitution tell me, when we go into that, my constitution tell me that straightly the local council is our public servant. And that is not happening at all. So they decide who they want to work with. They decide that we don't want you to be part of anything, we will exclude you. And they decide what rules they want to put down. So even if the community, we talk about the ground people, go with issues that is a concern for us, they are not being recognized. And the main concern for us is when a councillor just come into an area being elected that you do not even know. So they don't even know the issues that the community have on the ground level. They come in there, you never saw them, you just see them on the poster whatsoever, and then they are there at office. And if they decide that they want to be in the area where the office is, but they want to be in the other area, that is how we have to accept it. And that is something we need to look in, because when we questioned regarding vote of no confidence, it was said to us that once they are elected for 5 years, you can't get them out.
Thanks very much. I'm Moira Levy from Institute for African Alternatives and a project called In Defense of Our Constitutional Democracy. What I'm interested in, what's coming up from the panel, a really exciting idea about introducing or monitoring or calling for democracy within parties. And I'm looking at the party list system. Proportional representation is very good. Where it falls down in South Africa is that party lists, especially that of the ruling party, are determined in such an unbelievably undemocratic way. You can't fault the ANC. They go through all the branches right from the bottom level, and then you vote, and the branches come together and they decide the candidate, and it goes up and up to the highest level, and then at the very top they tweak it. They tweak it to meet the gender requirements, etc. The problem is the kind of people who get onto those party lists. And isn't there any way of constraining, and I don't want to sound elitist or exclusionist, but constraining who can actually be on a party list? Isn't there some kind of qualification, any kind of controls of their behavior? For example, Zondo was saying, isn't there a way that you can pass legislation that party members of parliament won't lose their seats if they stand in defiance of their party? Of course, the ANC is not going to vote for that, but there needs to be some way of checking that the people who take seats in parliament are qualified to do so. We have a very strange collection of people in parliament. And I mean, you know, their criminal record must be tested, but maybe also their levels of academia or their levels of understanding. So, yeah, I think that would be an idea worth considering.
Hi, hello, Penny Morell, and I'm just really interested in 1999 I worked in Parliament, and we were doing the orientation of new members of Parliament and had to work in legislatures, and they had absolutely no understanding of the difference between a constituency office and a political party office, which goes exactly to the point of the earlier speaker, that actually they said, no, but there's no difference, it's an ANC office. I said, no, it's a constituency office, anybody can come. So I think that's one of the problems, and I'm just wondering, I'm not aware of the political systems or of the Slubbert document or the details of it, but I mean a mixture of the PR plus a constituency level system sounds to me a really interesting one. I'd really value the panel's opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no questions per se on the online, but someone does agree with you, Moira, saying that they must definitely make sure that there's a retirement age as one factor. Which I mean, I don't want to make that joke in a room where the median age is. I'm gonna get you now. So there's that comment, but I'm gonna let Rachel ask one more question. I just wanted to double check if there's any questions. Go for it, Rachel.
Sorry, this was just for the panelists as well. We spoke a little bit about the youth and where we stand, you know, in terms of voting, etc. And I think one part of the problem, like personally I can think of, is that you say to yourself, well, if I vote for an independent, my vote is just, you know, it's not contributing to anything, so then I just don't vote. So when we're having this conversation, I wanted to say, well, say we go ahead with this. Say, you know, independents are encouraged to come into office, the road is made easy, etc. What can they do for the poor? If, as you said, it's one person in one seat, what can they do for the poor?
Thank you. Okay, I think we keep giving Dan the hard questions. You were the one who said they only get one seat. So firmly. Okay, so Letla Khanola, do you want to go first?
There was something about once someone is elected into power for 5 years, they become a statue. They are there. There's nothing that can be done. I think let's look at this thing in this way. It's now open season. It's elections. These people are going to be coming to us and asking us what to do for them. I think it's high time that we flip the tables. Maybe let's put the right of recall as sort of a mandate for political parties to say, this is how we want our electoral system to change, or it could have this clause, because what we have now is that they go into power and that's it. You'll see them after 5 years when they need your vote. So I think what we're looking for is a mechanism to hold them accountable. For instance, they come to us and give us these promises and say, this is what I'll do, this is how I'll perform. So once they don't achieve what they had said they're going to, there needs to be a way for us as the voters to be able to get them off. So we need to find a mechanism. So what happens now is that we don't have anything legally. The only people that can do that is political parties themselves. Once they are dissatisfied with one of their members, they can do that. But funny part is that we are the ones that had voted. So I think we need to look at a mechanism of getting those people out, and it's called the right of recall. They do have it in some countries. I think it's something that we can lobby for going forward as a mandate. I think once political parties start campaigning, we need to ask them, what are your views on this? Are you willing to be recalled once you don't do what you had said you are going to do? So I think this is something that we can put forward, and I think the time is now, because now they'll be coming to us asking for our votes. So instead of coming with a finished product of a manifesto, why us as the community not compile a manifesto for those political parties? So I think it's something that can be put on the table to lobby around into the future, to say that we need a right of recall both at local government and national. There was something on the party list that what influence can we have? Unfortunately, we don't, and because it's not even a constituency-based system, so there isn't even limitation in terms of who can be from where. As much as the political parties can be regional or they can be national, but what happens is that once it's time for them to go into the legislature, or once it's time for them to go to parliament, they pick their favorites. So you end up not having influence on that the list. I mean, they make such a long list. As much as there's only 400 seats in parliament, they make a long list in terms of hoping that they'll be there. So what they do is just they mainly tweak. But if there was an element of local representation, or if there was an element of constituency, there should have been a mandate to say there needs to be geographical representation in parliament. So that's where maybe the issues of certain areas, issues of Vuwani, issues of the cholera in Hamaskara, they would be vocal in parliament because there's different voices in the room. There was something on the constituency office. I did research on this, and it's quite disappointing in that they are funded by parliament, because the MPs and MPLs are assigned constituency offices. But something that we spoke about is that they are assigned constituencies in areas that they don't live in. You will find that you have a constituency somewhere in Bushbuck Ridge, but you reside here in the mountains in Cape Town. So what happens is that you don't even come, or you only come on those weeks where they call them constituency weeks. So what happens is that money is being pumped into that system. If you go through financial statements from Treasury, you will see millions of rands are pumped into the functioning of that office. There needs to be someone there. There needs to be people working. There needs to be computers. It needs to serve as a resource for people. So when the MP is back in the area, they're supposed to be there to engage with the people, to say, this is where we are at parliament. These are the important bills
this is what's happening, and vice versa. The people inform the MPs and they bring it back to Parliament. But there isn't a sense of functioning of those constituency offices. I think we really need to put our eyes on it, because a lot of money is being wasted. They don't function. What they actually end up doing is that they function as political party offices, which they are not supposed to be, because they are funded. Stop.
Yeah, so on, I think it was Moira's question, the issue actually lies with the status or the nature of political parties in South Africa, right? So they're not public bodies, they are private associations, or they're associations of individuals. And that limits us as non-members or as the voting public as to what kind of influence we can have in the direction of the decisions that they take. Whereas when you look at countries like Germany, they constitutionalized political parties, so they made them explicitly public bodies that any person, member or not, can participate in. And so it's very difficult to imagine what we can do under the current system to say, you know, there should be thresholds or standards or qualifications for the kinds of people you send to legislatures. But the truth is, there's very little that we can do as voters, even if we are voters of those specific political parties. So yeah, more reform also there. Lots of work to be done. Rachel, what can they do? So I think, one, there's value in representation itself, right? The very idea that someone that you voted for directly is in Parliament and is speaking on your behalf, I think that's empowering. I think that's fosters faith in the political system, right? And even if you or they may not individually be able to achieve certain things, certainly they don't come there as blank slates, right? They have ideas, they have goals that align maybe with other parties, with other independents, and they can form coalitions, they can form solidarity across political lines, and they can get things done. And it's part of, you know, the idea, ideally, is that Parliament legislatures are meant to be forums of persuasion and deliberation, and that's what you want your MP to be there to do. But I think that there's some value in seeing Letlogonolo that you voted for at your local school standing in Parliament, giving voice to your own concerns, right? So I think the one problem in South Africa is that we don't have a belief in the potential of politics. We refuse to do politics. People don't want to compromise. People don't want to persuade each other. They don't want to deliberate. We have 50+1. We are going to ram this thing through. We don't care what anyone thinks, right? And we see that as well. My very popular view, with the DA and the EFF running to court every minute. They do not seek political solutions. They're political parties, but there is this allure of a judge just saying, no, this is my decision and it binds you all, it's final, whatever. And that also leads to a loss of faith in the political system, because people think, oh, well, what does it matter anyway? The DA is going to run to court and things like that, you know. Misguided as it might be, that's the reality. But yes, I'm just going to round up. I think that, again, my feeling is that, or my view is that there's a lot that is lacking in our political culture that we are going to have to change in order for even the smallest tweaks to kind of bear fruit. Yeah.
I'm going to disagree with Dan. First of all, I think that there's fundamentally a problem with the system with when you get someone who gets multiple votes just getting one seat. And I think that that has to be addressed. Because I would rather have an excellent person sitting with 6 or 7 or 8 or 20 seats around them, empty seats around them, than a whole bunch of people that I didn't vote for lapping up that person's votes. I mean, and we have to address that. Because if we are saying that as an independent, you shouldn't be able to leverage public popularity to push and make votes for meaningful legislation, then what's the point? you're just hobbling people and you're actually stifling democracy. So I think that is something that is going to probably, I hope, be addressed in the litigation. The second thing is, as someone who regularly follows, court cases involving the EFF and the DA, is that even like, for instance, with this whole Putin arrest saga, there's a long-running, lawyers' letters getting sent and people just getting ignored and ignored and ignored. And so we've developed this culture, because government doesn't want to account for itself, doesn't want to account for its decision, that it's often through court processes that we actually find out what our government thinks. Up until a few days ago, we had no idea what was going on with Putin. Now we know, because of a court case, that, by the way, the president of the country wanted to keep all those court papers secret. And because it was, an ICC issue. It's only because 3 judges of the High Court said no, that we even know about this. So we have developed, and it's threatening for the judiciary, it's threatening for the country, this terrible culture where we are dependent on the courts to co-govern our country because our government isn't doing it. And continuously, whether it's eviction matters, the most basic issues of electricity provision, people are increasingly turning to the courts because that's really what they perceive the ultimately only functional arm of the state to be. And I think that it's created I don't know if it's created or just exposed a passivity in political parties where they just don't seem to want to do the right thing unless they're told to do the right thing by a court of law. And that is very, very damaging for all of us, because we should have government in place that we fundamentally believe is going to do what is in our interests as people, not have to be dragged to court every single time for them to do the right thing. As someone who recently got exposed to the court system in my personal capacity, I'm very grateful for the fact that our courts have continuously held the line in the way that they have. But I don't think they want to ideally be doing that. And I don't think it's democratically healthy for us to be in that position. But in order for that litigation pattern to stop, government needs to start doing its job and doing the right thing. Otherwise, people are going to continuously keep dragging them to court to make them do the right thing.
Can I respond to one thing? Yeah, just the one thing is, so I'm looking at this post next year's election, right, where the ANC is likely to lose a lot of its support. I don't know if it's going to go under 50% or not, but it will increasingly become important for there to be actual engagement at the level of parties themselves, where it will not be able to kind of bulldoze its way through legislatures. And so I think that I'm optimistic that things will change, right? That we won't have to constantly go to court to get very basic things done, which I agree with you on. But I just think even now that's just a bad habit. It doesn't bode well for democratic processes for that to keep happening. As to the independent candidate stuff, look, one person, one vote. I don't want an independent with 20 votes. Even right now, doesn't matter how many MPs the ANC has. If that MP is not there on that date, that vote cannot be cast. And that is a fundamental principle of just representation. I think that we are going to have to find a way, maybe like a transferable vote system where, the leftover votes get transferred to the next independent candidate or whatever. But it simply is not possible to reserve empty seats just because you were too popular and you overachieved. Thank you.
Not my high school experience. I'm going to open the floor for 2 more questions before I pose a final question to the speakers. And people, you have to stay for more food. One person, one pizza. No, I'm just joking. One, 2. So it's one in the corner, Tando, and then the person with the purple, and then anyone else? Purple, blue, I can't. No, it is purple and blue. And then Lynette also. And a very nice warm welcome to Lynette.
One of the things, sorry, my name's Josie. One of the things that's interested me when you talked, and I was sort of thinking of previous party lists, that the public could maybe demand public party lists earlier than what they seem to come out. That the age issue that somebody mentioned, I think, is important. Criminal records, that party lists should be subjected to more public scrutiny and criticism than they currently are enjoying.
Hi, my name is Kaya, and I'd just like to get the views of the panel of, potentially how many is too many? We've seen a lot of new political parties, and now with independent candidates. Does it not betray the spirit of independent representation if we have too many that, I guess, fragments the vote eventually? And this sort of speaks to the limitations that Karen was talking about.
Good evening, everybody. I want to just ask this question about the political culture that allows for all of these things to happen, where people have to actually seek other ways of holding the state to account, whether that is to the judiciary or through this kind of almost independent way of trying to hold it. And I want the panel to perhaps just speak to what can be done to actually change that culture.
Sure, I just wanted to read some of the comments that are online and then the panel may respond. Someone online says, Vincent says that provincial cognitive skills audit found that 298 of KZN's 1,944 councillors do not have adequate reading and writing skills, and that others had no formal education. Pat Molepo says, high time that SA public vote should vote for accountability and the rule of law and guarantee socioeconomic rights justice. Corruption, maladministration should be a wasted vote. She also says that some people are even promised grants to vote, and many poor communities fall for this political jargon. I think what she's referring to is that before the elections, promises are made. And she says that, of course, there should be a retirement age in terms of politicians. Yeah, I think those are all the comments.
There's one more question
Good evening, ladies. Charmaine. I'm from Sea Wings, youth leader. The problem is about the political parties. You must work for them till late in the night. When they are there, they do a lot of promises. And when we have our events and we go to ask, then they don't have money. Now what are they doing with the fundings they get? Isn't that for the communities or what? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. I'm going to hand it to Karen first. We'll start this way down. If you have any particular question you want to answer.
No, I'm giving it to Dan. No.
All right.
I will tell you, no one's going to avoid the political culture question. I'll ask.
Yeah, so Kaya, fragmentation, yeah, I think, look, we don't have limits on, how many parties can participate in whatever. And we've had, over the years, like parties spring up and then eventually be deregistered because they were dormant and we're not adhering to the legislation or whatever. But I think the one thing that is going to need to happen is that people will have to give up their political ambition and start seriously being realistic about what is achievable, right? I think, and this is the problem with social media, is that there's such great potential for a wide reach, right? You reach about 50,000 people on Twitter alone, and you think, I could start a political party, and maybe you could, and then you get to the polls and you perform really badly, but you've also split the vote, and there's the number of substantial representation in the national or in parliament or wherever shrinks more and more, and you end up with these big parties that we have seen, and end up with one party dominance for a long time. So I think people will have to give up political ambition, look at what exists, forge new relationships, try actually make a dent in the political space. That's the one thing. But obviously, we can't tell people not to start political parties. So, to each their own. Political culture, it's a very difficult question that I've thought about, and I think one thing is that politics has become so polarized, so looked down upon, right? There's the era of the Mandelas and the Sisulus is gone, right? You don't see politicians as something that you would want to be a part of, something to aspire to. There isn't that desire to see yourself actually make a change, because people don't think that's what politicians are there for. They don't think that politicians are there to lead or carry out a project of collective self-realization, right? We see it as a ticket to the big time. You want money, you get by the way, ANC membership dirt cheap. So you attend a few branch meetings, you become a delegate, you're on the list to the National Assembly. And that's the picture that people have in their minds, and no one wants to be a politician, and no one wants to get involved in politics because, ooh, that's dirty, and you shy away from that. And I think that contributes a lot to the political culture that we have. Why people don't vote, people just sit at home and drink and braai on voting day, and it's like, but what are you doing? So it's a very difficult question that I don't know how to answer. But what I do know is, for any of the changes that we want to make to work, there has to be input from every single one of us. We have to want to make this country work. Yeah.
Okay. I'm also battling with this one of too many political parties, too many independent candidates. Things with the new Electoral Act, it said it's now legislation, so we're just going to have it like that, as much as we are unhappy with it, and how it's skewed in terms of I know you advocate for this one member, and it makes sense, but I mean, that's the problem. It's fundamentally wrong, and then there you are at the top just getting the outcome. But the whole recipe, how that thing was cooked, is terrible. It's terrible. That's where we are at. And the issue with signatures, I think it was touched that for independent candidates, they need to get a higher threshold of signatures than political parties in order to be able to contest. One of the logic that political parties provided for this was to say, hey, there's going to be too many people, the ballot was going to be too long. So these are mechanisms of trying to limit the amount of people that are able to contest. So I don't know to what extent does it answer your question, to say that do we need to look into threshold in terms of who makes it into to contest in the first place, because the IC does not really mandate that. They just receive the deposit and people come with the signatures. But political parties here in Parliament were trying to say that let's frustrate them and say we need 15,000 signatures for independent candidates so that they give up and then we don't have a lot of people. So maybe we can think of other ways to limit, but there's a flip side to that, because now what about people, the right of association, people want to come, so it's a bit of a tricky one. There was something about formal education for ward councillors. That's also another one. There isn't a requirement, as far as I know, a formal requirement for a ward councillor to have academic qualification. They need to qualify politically in terms of this is where you live and having the mandate of people. So we really have no way around that. I mean, it's a political appointment. You become a ward councillor, or you get into the municipalities. You have a team. You are provided with a team. You just need to work well. But I think in terms of reform here, we could look at issues of how the ward councillor can be more accountable, making use of channels like ward committees. Can we attend to those, opening up the IDP process? I think the accountability can be on those processes. And I think it's for us. People don't like this, but I think we do need more political education as ourselves as voters, understanding how local government works. That thing is so complex, I didn't understand it, but you need to take the time to understand what is the IDP process, when does it happen, how does local government functions, what are wards, what are sort of these things. I think once you know, you are able to sort of hold those people accountable. And on the political culture, I think I agree with Dan. Ultimately, it becomes patronage politics. You know, it's poverty. The only way out of poverty is through political parties. I share the same sentiment.
Yes, go for it. I just want to say that next month or the month after, we are going to have an IDP online training session. So if you want to learn more about the IDP process, make sure you're on our mailing list.
I just wanted to say on the formal education issue, 57% of our population lives in poverty. So the majority of our population is poor. And I think we must just be very careful that we don't use education or this idea that you have to be formally qualified to exclude people who have a rich sense of experience and lived reality within those communities, natural born leaders that had they been in different circumstances, they may have been able to, you know, live a very different life. I would rather have someone coming from a community, you know, speaking to that community's needs than someone who's living in Sandton and speaking about an area that they have no knowledge of. But I think that there's another issue there, is that people who are put into those political offices in a way that is both empowering need to be given, you know, like access to skills if, for example, they haven't had, for instance, computer training or things like that, because that can be significantly empowering to someone, particularly in terms of doing that job. So I think where there are training needs, that should be addressed, but in a non-patronizing, non-derogatory way for that person to feel empowered and more able to do their job without being intimidated by a system which we know is fundamentally quite anti-rural. And the realities of our rural poor versus, you know, people in cities where we can complain are very, very dire. And I think that, you know, so I think that there's potential reform in that. And then just on the issue of, you know, what our landscape changes, what I find amazing is that South Africans, as much as we are not politically minded, we are fundamentally activist in our nature. And you can see this, the way South Africans, I promise you, I travel a lot. I was just in America. You can see this, the way a South African will just get involved. You know, like you fall on the street, people will pull you up. You know, people try and ANC, you know, when they were trying to take that, you know, the flood relief, and that lady parked her car to block them from taking the flood relief away. There was a whole community in one area that went and fixed their own potholes, because there is a desire, an innate desire in the heart of, I think, everyone who is still here, that we actually want to like fix things. You know what I mean? So, you know, that is the heart of politics, is that we need to start moving this idea around politics is something that happens in parliament, and start understanding politics is something that happens in your community. And when your community is not being served, what are your options? And we're seeing that more and more, unfortunately, with that unsuccessful litigation in terms of, you know, Eskom, that community that got its own power supply, and Eskom challenged them in court. We hope they win on appeal. the community, not ESCOM. But, you know, that kind of thing. I think there's a burgeoning sense, and it's what makes South Africa a great country, of this desire to be self-sufficient and to find solutions. Because the one thing about South Africans, people in this country, we have a plan A, plan B, plan Z. We will always make a plan. Now we need to make a plan for our own country because, you know, that's what we're good at. And I think when we start situating, and there's real engagement and real non-patronizing involvement with communities to find solutions that work with them, for them, with them, then we'll see a real change happening. But that's where politics is happening, in communities, not in parliament.
Thank you very much. I'm going to close off the session and ask, I'm going to close it off soon and ask if the panelists have any final comments. But my final question for you guys is, there are limitations to the courts. I very much agree with Dan about the the imaginative nature in which just going to court is. We need to participate in democratic processes. So there's limitations in the court process. There's limitations in our current system, as you've said. There's limitations in the independent candidate process. And that there's also limitations in trying to internalize democracy in political parties. So I've problematized the issue, but I just want to know how you think what we can do to somehow strengthen accountability and build people's power in the next elections and going forward. I know Karen's given some very good examples, but yeah, so how do we avoid that political culture I'll give you guys a second. And while I give them a second, I just want to say that please don't leave after the event. Thanks. But Rachel will be closing off. Yeah.
So the question is greater accountability. Hey guys, it seems so impossible, but it's possible. I said it's open season, so I mean the political parties are gonna behave strangely now because they need us. But I think it's maybe some high time that we think about different electoral strategies altogether. I know South Africans are very shy to.
I think it's just it's just with you.
It's me. Afraid to challenge political parties and forget that we actually send them to parliament. We are the boss, not the other way around. So I think we need to change the mindset a bit, and especially now towards elections. So let's look at different electoral strategies. I spoke about manifestos. Let's be the one that tell them this is what we want, and we'll vote for you if you promise this is what you're going to do. There's a controversial one as well, which is strategic voting. Thinking about voting for somebody that you less prefer simply because they're going to do what you think they're going to do, like in terms of work efficiently. Because of our history, we've been, voting in a certain way. Then put it nicely to say we've been voting for someone that looks like us, in terms of race, in terms of loyalty. But I think maybe we can mature in terms of how we vote. Let's vote for change. I don't want to say vote for change, but let's look at the issues differently. So I think going into these elections, I think we need to sort of strategize how we look at them and how we vote, and use our vote powerfully in terms of how to effect change. It's possible.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very difficult to imagine what like greater accountability would look like if we still have the same kind of people that we have right now after next year's election. But the one thing that I have been fortunate enough to get involved in is the public participation processes in Parliament. And part of my job is nagging politicians. It's writing copious amounts of letters and emails and just pester. And eventually they take you seriously and they listen to you. But not all of us have the luxury of doing that. But there has to be a way of getting involved in a sustained way so that your presence is known and it's taken seriously, right? That your inputs start to be valued as a voter. I'm not sure what else could be done beyond that, but I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean the accountability issue is so frustrating, because we've had situations in which people have been elected officials facing rape charges with their children. We all know of which I refer. Those like really, really horrendous situations, and I think that our bar is so low that we're literally like, well, at least they're not a criminal, I think that it's about education. It's about people knowing what their rights are. I think a narrative that we often hear repeated is that certain people vote for a certain party because they believe that party will provide them with grants, things like that. If I would make any argument for voter education, I would say go to Umhlobo Wenene, go to like a Zulu station, a vernacular station, Pala Pala FM, and get people in vernacular to explain this is how an election works, and to fundamentally ask people to get involved in their democracy, have community media engagements. It's so interesting to me that we never ever see like a strong political debate in a rural area. You're not going to see the DA debating the ANC in Soshanguve, which is not a rural area on the outskirts of Pretoria. But you don't see that kind of thing happening. And I think that that's something that should change. Because I fundamentally feel that these guys have no respect for us as voters. They literally are just about the numbers, but they don't see the electorate as human beings, and they don't see them as requiring anything more than the absolute bare minimum. And so I think for that culture to change, we have to start demanding more than the bare minimum and saying, but we don't accept this. And whatever form that takes, whether it's young people who are so fundamentally underrepresented in the voters pool, making it clear on outlets like social media, which these guys actually do pay attention to, about why they're not voting. And fundamentally saying that it's because of X, Y, Z. When we start hearing the voices of people who are not voting and about why they're not doing that, I think that's very important. But I think fundamentally, I honestly believe that the people that will make a big change in this election are not the fearmongers, are not the harbingers of disaster, are not the people that use hatred and fear and intimidation to try and scare people into voting for them. It's going to be the parties and the individuals who offer the country hope. And I hope that is what we vote for, because you should always have your plans led by your hopes, not your fears. And I mean, I think South Africans fundamentally at this point really do need something to hope for. And I hope that's what happens with our next election.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those words. And I mean, it's a bit cliche, but it is Nelson Mandela's birthday this week, and I do think that our choices need to reflect our hopes, not our fears, which is something that he said. So thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you to the audience and for their lovely questions. Please do stay. There is coffee, there's tea, there's soup, there's wine, there's pizza. So, Karl Marx said, before we can have a revolution, we must eat. So while there's been a call to action, there's also eat. I just want to also make one more call, which is that if you are feeling so inclined, please remember that you can make a donation on the QR code. If you want to give money in cash, please don't give it to anyone but our finance manager, Bridget, who will waive herself. Bridget, please, if you feel so inclined. She's not in this room, but I will tell you who Bridget is. And then if you buy a book, you get a free tote bag today. Which is a black sash. Oh, that's Bridget over there. Thank you, Bridget. So, yeah, you can speak to Bridget about any financing issues. She'll also help you with your tax. It's a free tote bag, which is part of our food justice campaign. So thank you very much. And like I said, the books are on sale inside. And we have gifts for you. But We'll give it to you afterwards. we mustn't let we mustn't let the food parcel come before the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask for a round of applause for our speakers, please? Thank you. You know, one thing about conversations like these is that we're speaking to the converted. The fact that we're in this room, we're the people that care. We are the people that know the problems, and we're constantly wishing that the people we're speaking about would be in this room and hearing what these conversations are. One of the most frustrating aspects of my job running Black Sash is dealing with government, because exactly what you say is true. You will send letters, you'll have meetings, you'll have conversation. It goes in one ear, right out the other. And it's only when the threat of the court hangs over people's head that suddenly you see movement. And that shouldn't be the kind of society we live in, because you and I have the capability to do that. We have the ability to send the letters, to insist on the meetings, but it's not everyone on the ground who has that ability, right? And so as people in this room, the call to action would be, when you go back into your communities, with the abilities you have, with the kind of access you might have, no matter how small, I think it's to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, and making sure that people understand that no matter how hopeless the situation seems, it's important that people go to the polls in 2024, because staying home and not voting is not the answer to what we're doing. Another interesting thing is that Black Sash is 68 years old. 68 years old. Initially, the fight was against the apartheid government, but we've continued to exist because the fight against poverty has continued. The fight against what was promised versus what we're living, continues. And I want to acknowledge particularly all Black Sash members who are in this room. We had a tea a while back, and I teased them about how every single one of them had joined Black Sash before I was born. So that just speaks to the commitment of everybody in this room, the commitment to making sure that whoever is in power accounts to the people. And if you don't account to the people, even if we're just housewives, we will take you to task. And so I want to acknowledge you and thank you for the continued support. We are here today because of the work that the former members of Black Sash did. And one of the other thing I'd like to acknowledge also is someone who's also become a good friend of mine, the former director of Black Sash, Lynette Mart, who's here. Lynette is the person whose shoes I've been trying to fill for the last 2 years. So Lynette, also, the work you've done is why we're also here. I want to acknowledge also our trustees, people who are on the screen as well. Thank you for joining. And I think it's important that the conversation keeps going even once you've left this room, and that you don't feel that you're too small alone, because this is proof that the community is big. You're not on your own in that space, yeah? So I am going to invite Koliwe to come up, and then 2 more minutes, and then the food is all ours. It's arrived. I encourage you to please network with each other. Please meet someone you haven't met. Don't stay in your circle. I think it's important to know that other people feel the same way about these issues, and so strongly, yeah? And I think the power is going out at 8. No, it's not. Oh, okay. So, Amanda, do you want to do the honors? These are just little thank yous. Jenny, thank you for providing the wine that we are having this evening. It's really delicious, right? No, I was saying, I wanted to describe the taste. I wanted to say fruity, oaty, but I'm not the right person for that. But that's good. So, ladies and gentlemen, if I can ask that we just give our speakers a round of applause, and then please head out to the back. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for our colleagues online, but we will eat enough for you as well. Okay. Thank you. Please head to the back.